He wasn't supposed to exist in this world. Lior was an Omega, born in a place where scent, instinct, and fate ruled everything. Until one moment ripped him out of it and dropped him into a world that had none of those things, no alphas, no bonds, no one who could understand what he was, or what his body needed, lost, starving, and on the verge of breaking. He thought surviving would be his biggest problem, until he saved a bleeding stranger in the dark, a man named Everett Kane, and unknowingly tied his fate to someone far more dangerous than the world he came from. I woke up in a world where people like me don't exist. The moment my eyes opened, I felt it. The absence, no scent, no presence, no invisible threads tying people together. It was all gone, like an entire part of existence had been erased, leaving the air hollow and wrong. I stumbled through crowded streets, the noise too sharp, the people too distant, everything moving too fast while I felt like I was falling apart. "Excuse me." I grabbed someone's sleeve, my voice shaking. "Where can I find an alpha?" The man jerked away instantly, staring at me like I was insane. "What are you talking about?" Someone else muttered. "Is he crazy?" I swallowed hard, panic rising in my throat. "An Omega shelter, please." But no one answered. No one understood. They only looked at me with confusion, with distance, with quiet rejection, like I wasn't meant to exist here. And maybe I wasn't, because I could feel it too. The emptiness where scent should have been, my body weakening with every step. Hunger twisting painfully in my stomach, while something deeper stirred beneath my skin, subtle at first, but growing. A familiar heat I couldn't ignore. Not here, not now. I forced myself forward, my vision blurring, my legs barely holding me up, and that was when I saw him. A man slumped against the wall of a narrow alley, blood soaking through his shirt, the sharp metallic scent hanging faintly in the air. Anyone else would have walked away, but I couldn't. My feet carried me toward him before I could think, dropping to my knees beside him. "Hey, can you hear me?" I reached out, my fingers brushing his shoulder, his skin burning beneath my touch, his breathing uneven but there, alive, and beneath the scent of blood and smoke, something else, faint, broken, but real, dark wood, leather, something warm hidden under danger. My breath caught, my body reacting before my mind could understand. And then, footsteps, fast, sharp, cutting through the silence. I froze, instinct screaming at me to run, but it was too late. Two men appeared at the alley entrance, their eyes locking onto us with cold intent. "There he is," one of them said, and everything happened at once. The man in front of me moved, his hand snapping up to grab my wrist and drag me down against him. My body pressed tightly to his chest, strong, solid, heat radiating through him, and in that instant, the scent hit me clearer, still faint, still fractured, but grounding, dangerous, and steady. I said, "Don't move." His voice was low, rough, controlled. And then, 2 shots, precise. Final. The men dropped before they could take another step. Silence crashed down, heavy and suffocating. My heart pounded wildly, my fingers clutching his shirt as the scent wrapped around me, pulling me in, calming the storm inside me. I shouldn't have. I knew I shouldn't have, but I leaned closer, closer, until my face pressed against his chest, my arms wrapping around him tightly. Desperate, instinctive, and beneath his dark, heavy scent, something inside me slipped free, my own scent, soft, warm, like white tea steeping in gentle heat, like honey, dissolving into rain-soaked air, subtle, but real. No one else reacted. No one else even noticed, like it didn't exist for them at all. But for him, it did. Everett Kane went completely still for a fraction of a second, his grip tightening around me, not pushing me away, but holding me there. He should have shoved me off, should have ended it right there. A witness, a risk, a stranger, but he didn't. Because for the first time in years, the pain in his body dulled, replaced by something quiet, something grounding, something dangerously close to relief. His breath slowed, just slightly. "Boss." Multiple figures rushed into the alley, weapons drawn, only to freeze at the sight in front of them. Everett Kane kneeling among blood and bodies, gun still in hand, and in his arms a slender young man clinging to him like letting go would break him. My vision had already gone dark, my strength gone. The last thing I felt was his hand pressing firmly against my back, steady, anchoring, like he wasn't going to let me fall. "Handle the bodies," Everett said coldly, not looking away. His men moved instantly, but one of them hesitated, glancing at me. "Boss, what about him?" There was a pause, brief, but enough, because the answer should have been obvious. But Everett shifted instead, adjusting his hold on me without loosening it, lifting me effortlessly, my body unconsciously leaning into him. The faint scent of white tea and honey lingering against his skin, something he couldn't ignore, something he didn't want to lose. "He's coming with me," he said, like it wasn't even a decision. "Boss, you're wound." "It's nothing." Everett cut him off, already turning toward the car, his grip on me unwavering, as if letting go had never been an option. And as he stepped out of the alley, leaving behind the bodies, the blood, the chaos, there was only one thought he couldn't shake. Why couldn't he let go? He didn't let go, even when he should have. Not when the car door closed, not when the engine started, not even when the city lights blurred past them in streaks of gold and white. Everett Kane still held him, one arm firm around the trembling body in his lap, as if loosening his grip even slightly would make him slip away. The heat came first, subtle at the beginning, but rising too fast to ignore. The fragile frame in his arms growing warmer by the second, breath uneven, shallow, and then the movement, instinctive, unguarded. The stranger shifted closer, fingers tightening weakly against Everett's shirt before clutching harder, pulling himself in as if searching for something he couldn't name, his face pressing deeper into Everett's chest, burying into fabric stained with blood and smoke. And that was when Everett felt it clearly. The difference, the scent, soft and warm, white tea steeped in heat, honey melting slowly into something cooler, like rain lingering in the air after a storm, faint, but enough to cut through the sharp pulse of pain radiating from his wound, enough to steady his breathing just slightly, his jaw tightening as the stranger's hand brushed dangerously close to the injured side, pressing just enough to send a sharp flash of pain through him. It hurt, but not enough to make him let go. Not when the fingers clutching his shirt tightened again. Not when the body in his arms leaned closer, as if he was the only thing keeping it from falling apart. "Boss, you're wound." The voice from the front seat came again, more urgent this time, but Everett didn't respond, his attention fixed entirely on the figure clinging to him, the way he reacted, the way he sought him out without knowing why. And for the first time, Everett didn't push it away, didn't dismiss it as instinct or coincidence, because the closer he was, the harder it became to think clearly. "Drive," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, leaving no room for hesitation. By the time they reached the penthouse, the heat hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown worse, the body in his arms burning, trembling, clinging even tighter as Everett stepped out of the car. The cold air outside did nothing to cool him, because the moment distance threatened to form, the stranger moved again, a soft, broken sound escaping his lips, his fingers tightening, refusing to let go. Everett paused for the briefest second before continuing forward, ignoring the way his wound throbbed. With every step, ignoring the weight that should have been inconvenient, unnecessary, but wasn't. Not anymore. Inside, the lights came on one by one, revealing a space built for control, not comfort. Everett crossed it without slowing, placing him carefully onto the bed, but the moment he pulled away, the reaction was immediate. The faint scent faded, the quiet steadiness in his chest slipping with it, and the hand that had been gripping his shirt tightened again, weak, but desperate. "Don't." The word barely formed, fragile, breathless, fingers catching onto his sleeve as if it was the only thing keeping him from falling. Everett stilled, just for a second, looking down at him, at the flushed skin, the trembling lashes, the way his body instinctively leaned toward him even in half-consciousness, searching, needing, and something in his chest shifted, quiet, unfamiliar. "Stay." The voice came again, softer this time, almost breaking, and for a moment, Everett didn't move, didn't pull away, didn't answer, before his hand lifted slowly, fingers brushing lightly against warm skin, grounding, steady, just enough. "Lie still," he said, his tone low, controlled, not gentle, but not cold either. Just enough to anchor, just enough to make the grip on his sleeve loosen slightly, and only then did he step back, turning away before the hesitation could settle deeper. "Call the doctor," he ordered the moment he stepped out, his voice sharp again, as if nothing had shifted, as if the faint scent of white tea and honey wasn't still clinging to him in a way he couldn't ignore, as if his body didn't still remember the warmth. Minutes later, The doctor arrived, quick, efficient, unaware of anything unusual. Everett stood at a distance, silent, watching as the man checked temperature, pulse, breathing, routine, clinical, detached, just a fever. The doctor said finally, straightening up. He's exhausted, likely hasn't eaten properly. Everett's gaze darkened slightly. The answer too simple, too ordinary. And the scent? He asked, voice low, direct. The doctor frowned, confused. What scent? Everett didn't look away. On him. A pause, longer this time. The doctor glanced back before shaking his head. There's nothing unusual. Everett's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. You don't smell anything? No, the doctor replied. And when Everett looked up at his men, silent, waiting, he asked again, colder this time. Any of you? They exchanged brief glances before shaking their heads. No, boss. And that was when it settled, quiet but absolute. The difference, the impossibility of it, because he could still smell it, faint but undeniable, the soft warmth of white tea and honey lingering in the air, wrapping around him, grounding him, while for everyone else, there was nothing. Everett stood there in silence, his gaze drifting back to the bed, to the fragile figure burning under the sheets, breathing unevenly, and the thought came, clear, sharp, leaving no room for doubt. It wasn't meant for anyone else, it was his. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I felt wasn't fear, it was warmth, faint but steady, wrapping around me like something familiar I couldn't explain. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, clean lines, muted tones, nothing like the world I knew. And for a moment, I didn't move, didn't breathe, afraid that if I did, everything would disappear again. You're awake. The voice came from the side, low, controlled, and before I could think, my body reacted first, instinctively leaning toward it. Toward him, I turned, and there he was, standing a short distance away, composed, untouched, as if the blood I had seen before had never existed. Everett Kane, the man I had found in that alley, the only presence in this world that felt even remotely real. My fingers tightened slightly against the sheets as I pushed myself up, still weak, still lightheaded, but unable to look away. You saved me, he said simply. No exaggeration, no wasted words, just fact, and something in his tone made it sound like a debt already acknowledged, already settled in his mind. You don't have anywhere to go, he continued, his gaze steady, unreadable. Stay here. A pause, just enough to make the words settle. You're under my protection now. It wasn't an offer, not quite a command either. Something heavier, something that left no real space to refuse. I hesitated, my breath catching slightly, before the question slipped out. Quiet, uncertain. Are you an alpha? Everett's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened just slightly, not with recognition, but with unfamiliarity. What's an alpha? He asked, the question so direct it made my chest tighten. I froze. The answer caught somewhere between instinct and fear, because I had seen this already. The way people looked at me, the way they stepped away, the way the world rejected things it didn't understand. I shook my head quickly, forcing the words back. It's nothing, I said, softer this time. More careful, because I understood now, saying more would only make me sound like something broken, something that didn't belong. But even as I lowered my gaze, the truth settled quietly, undeniably. He was different, the only one in this world who didn't feel empty, the only one who felt real. Then what about the scent? Everett's voice came again, pulling me back, more direct this time. The one on you, it's calming. I blinked, startled, my eyes lifting to meet his, searching, because no one else had reacted, no one else had noticed, not on the street, not here, not anyone. It's natural, I answered slowly, choosing each word. Something I was born with. Everett didn't look away, his gaze steady, measuring. Then why am I the only one who can smell it? The question landed heavier than it should have, and, for a moment, I had no answer. Only the quiet certainty settling deeper, clearer, that he really was the only one. I don't know, I admitted softly. And for once, he didn't press further. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't empty either. Something unspoken forming between us, something neither of us understood, but neither of us could ignore. The days that followed blurred together in a way I hadn't expected. Life here, it wasn't completely different. People lived, worked, created, The world moved in patterns I could almost recognize. The only thing missing was the system that had once defined everything I was. And without it, I had to relearn everything, slowly, carefully. I found it in the quiet places, studios filled with unfinished work, galleries lined with unfamiliar styles. I had studied sculpture before, shaping form from nothing, giving meaning to something lifeless. But here, it was different, sharper, colder, and I found myself drawn to it. Fingers pressing into clay, shaping without realizing, losing time in the process, because it was the closest thing I had to grounding myself in this world. And while I did that, Everett remained distant, controlled, occupied with a world I wasn't part of, meetings, decisions, power moving quietly around him. And yet, even in that distance, there were moments, small, unintentional, when something slipped through. Because in the middle of conversations, in the quiet pauses between decisions, his mind would drift, uninvited, back to something he couldn't erase, the memory of warmth, of fragile weight in his arms, of a scent that didn't belong in his world, and yet had found its way into it anyway. And he didn't like it, didn't like the way it lingered, the way it followed him when it shouldn't, because it wasn't control, it wasn't logic, it wasn't him. It was something else, something unfamiliar, something he should have cut off. The moment it appeared, and yet, he hadn't. He should have forgotten it. But he didn't, because even when he forced the thought away, even when he buried it under routine and control, it didn't leave. The first thing Everett Kane did wasn't to question me. It was to observe, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't about how I felt or what I needed. It was simpler, colder. Where are you from? The question came without hesitation, direct, leaving no space to avoid it. I stilled for a second, my fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the table. The word caught in my throat before I forced it out. Slower this time, more careful. I don't remember. Everett didn't react immediately. His gaze steady, unreadable. You don't remember anything? I shook my head, keeping my eyes lowered just enough to seem uncertain. I woke up with nothing, no phone, no ID, nothing at all. It wasn't entirely a lie, just not the truth he was looking for. Silence followed. Not empty, but heavy, measuring, calculating, and I could feel it. The way he was assessing every word, every pause, deciding whether I was worth believing or eliminating. Family, he asked again. Shorter this time, sharper. I hesitated, just enough, before shaking my head again. I don't know. Another half-truth, another careful answer. Everett leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the armrest. Controlled, restrained, convenient. The word was quiet, but it carried weight, suspicion lingering beneath it. I didn't respond to that, because anything I said would only make it worse. Instead, I forced the conversation forward, shifting it to something safer, something real. If I'm going to stay here, I'll need to figure things out. My voice steadier now, more grounded. Identification, work, things like that. Everett didn't interrupt, so I continued. Is there a way to apply for those here? His gaze lingered on me for a second longer before he answered. I'll have someone handle it. Simple, efficient, like everything else he did. I nodded slightly, before adding, quieter this time. And I'll need a job. That made him pause, just briefly, his eyes narrowing just enough to show interest. What kind of job? I hesitated again, not because I didn't know, but because saying it out loud felt strangely distant, like something from another life. There are galleries here, right? I asked instead, lifting my gaze to meet his. I work with sculpture and painting. Everett studied me for a second, longer than before, as if trying to reconcile that answer with everything else that didn't make sense, before giving a short nod. Rest for now, he said finally, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'll have someone look into it. And just like that, it was decided. As if my future here had already been placed into motion without my involvement, he reached into his pocket. Then, pulling out a card and placing it on the table in front of me. Black, minimal, unmistakably expensive. Use this, he said, not looking away. Get whatever you need. I blinked, caught off guard for the first time, my fingers hovering slightly above it. I'll pay it back. The words came automatically, instinctively, because I had nothing else to offer. Everett's expression didn't change. Consider it alone, he replied, just enough to make it easier to accept, just enough to remove the hesitation. I nodded slowly, picking it up, the weight of it unfamiliar in my hand, but grounding in a way I didn't expect, and for a moment, things almost felt normal, almost steady, until it started again, subtle at first, a flicker of heat beneath my skin, a shift in my breathing that I couldn't ignore. I knew what it was immediately, even if I didn't want to admit it. Not here, not in a place that didn't understand. I forced myself to stay still, to keep distance, to hold it back as long as I could, but it didn't matter. It never did. The heat built quietly, relentlessly, until my body betrayed me completely, my fingers tightening against the table, my breath uneven, my thoughts slipping. Everett noticed it instantly. Of course he did. What's wrong? His voice cut through the moment, sharper now, more alert. I shook my head instinctively, stepping back. Nothing. But the word didn't hold. Not when my body leaned forward without permission the moment he stepped closer. The scent. Hitting harder this time. Clearer. Overwhelming. I staggered slightly, my hand gripping the edge of the table for support. Please. It slipped out again. Weaker this time. Unguarded, Everett froze for a fraction of a second, before something shifted in his expression. Darker now. Colder. Suspicion rising fast. Too fast. What did you do? His voice dropped. Dangerous, his hand moving before I could react. Fingers closing around my throat. Firm, controlled, enough to stop me, enough to silence. Me? Who sent you? The words were sharp, cutting through the haze, and for a moment, everything went still, the warmth gone, replaced by something cold, something distant. I couldn't breathe, not because of the pressure, but because of the fear. I didn't. My voice broke, my hands instinctively gripping his wrist, not to push him away, but to hold on, because even now, even like this, the scent was still there, faint but real. The only thing keeping me from losing myself completely. Don't lie to me. Everett's grip tightened slightly, his gaze locked on mine, searching for something, anything that would confirm the thought forming in his mind, that this was planned, that this was a trap, that I was nothing more than something sent to break him. And then it broke. A single tear slipped down before I could stop it, my fingers tightening weakly around his wrist, my voice barely there. Please. I don't understand. No calculation, no control, just fear, raw and real, enough to crack something. Just slightly. Everett stilled, his grip loosening by a fraction, his expression tightening instead, because it didn't fit. The reaction was wrong. Too real, too unguarded to be planned. His hand dropped slowly, releasing me, but he didn't step back, didn't create distance. I staggered, my breath uneven, but I didn't move away. Couldn't. My body leaning forward again without permission, drawn back to him like it had no other choice. Help me. The words came softer now, almost breaking. Everett felt it again, stronger this time. The scent wrapping around him, pulling him in, making it harder to think, harder to stay detached. He should have ended this, should have walked away, should have removed the risk before it became something worse. But he didn't, because for one brief, dangerous moment, his control slipped. We'll deal with this later, he said finally, his voice lower now, steadier, but not untouched, his hand lifting again, this time not to restrain, but to steady, fingers closing around my arm, firm, grounding, as if anchoring both of us at once. And even as the thought settled cold in his mind that he would investigate, that he would find the truth there, was another one, quieter, harder to deny, that he didn't want to let me go. The moment Everett chose not to walk away, something shifted, not in the room, but in him, in the way that distance disappeared without warning, in the way control, something he had never lost, slipped just enough to matter. Lior's body was still trembling, heat pooling beneath his skin, rising in quiet waves that refused to break, his breathing uneven as he leaned forward again, instinct overriding everything else. Please. The word barely held, soft, fragile, and Everett felt it, sharper than before, the pull, the quiet insistence of something he couldn't name. The scent wrapped around him, white tea deepened by warmth, honey melting into something heavier, something that settled under his skin and stayed. The longer he remained, the harder it was to leave. He should have stepped back, should have ended it there, but he didn't, his hand lifting slowly, deliberately, resting against Lior's shoulder, grounding, steady. And the reaction was immediate. The tension in Lior's body eased. In small, fragile waves, his fingers tightening weakly against Everett's sleeve, holding on as if that single point of contact was enough to keep him from falling apart. Stay still, Everett said, his voice lower now, controlled, but no longer untouched. He moved closer, just enough for the scent to deepen, for the space between them to disappear, his hand sliding slightly, measured, controlled, along Lior's arm, his back, not hurried, not forceful, but present, enough to guide, enough to anchor, and Lior responded without thinking, his breathing slowing under that steady rhythm, his body leaning into the contact, closer, seeking, as if Everett was the only thing holding him together. And for a moment, Everett stopped resisting it, the control he had built over years loosening just enough to let something else take hold, something slower, heavier, harder to define. The room faded, the noise faded, until there was only this warmth, breath, the quiet pull of something that refused to be ignored. Time stretched, blurred, until the heat finally softened, the tension easing from Lior's body as exhaustion replaced it, his grip loosening, his breathing evening out, and still, Everett didn't step away, his hand lingering, his presence remaining longer than it should have. He made sure the rhythm of Lior's breathing steadied, that the trembling had stopped, before finally pulling back, slow, controlled, as if detaching from something that had already rooted itself deeper than he intended. This wasn't control anymore, and that realization alone was enough to make his jaw tighten slightly. Rest, he said quietly, turning away before the hesitation could settle again. The door closing behind him with a soft click, and for a moment, the world returned to what it was supposed to be, cold, quiet, controlled, until it didn't. So, this is what's been distracting you. The voice cut through the hallway, sharp, precise, and Everett didn't need to look to know who it was. Valerie Kane stepped forward from the shadows, her gaze already shifting past him toward the closed door, lingering there a second too long. She had been at his side longer than anyone else, and she knew exactly what he was supposed to be. You brought him here, she continued, her tone quieter now, but edged with something far more dangerous. No records, no identity, and now this. Everett didn't respond immediately, his expression unchanged, but something behind his eyes sharpened just slightly. That's not your concern, he said coldly, moving to pass her, but Valerie didn't step aside. Not yet. It should be, she replied, stepping closer, her voice dropping, controlled but tight. You don't see it, do you? The way he reacts, the way you react. Everett's gaze darkened slightly, but he said nothing, and that silence was enough for her to press further. That's not normal. The words landed heavier this time, more personal, and for a fraction of a second, something in Everett's expression shifted, just enough for her to see it, before it disappeared again, replaced by the familiar distance. Watch him, Everett said instead, his voice lower now, final. But don't touch him. The warning was clear, absolute, and that alone was enough to make Valerie pause, her expression tightening slightly, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. But she stepped back, just enough to let him pass, even if the tension remained. If he's a problem, Valerie said quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough for him to hear, I'll deal with it. Everett didn't stop, didn't turn back, but his steps didn't slow either. And somewhere behind that closed door, in a room that still carried the faint trace of white tea and honey, something had already begun, something neither of them could walk away from, even if they wanted to. It didn't take long for the tension to surface. In Everett Kane's world, imbalance never stayed hidden for long. Lior felt it before he could explain it. The way conversations cut short when he entered, the way eyes lingered just a second too long, the quiet shift in the air that never fully settled. And then it happened, fast, sharp, without warning. A hand caught his arm the moment he stepped into the hallway. Valerie Kane, her grip precise, unyielding, pulling him back hard enough to throw him off balance. The impact came a second later, his body hitting the wall, the air knocked out of his lungs in a single breathless second, pain blooming across his ribs as he struggled to steady himself. You shouldn't be here. Valerie's voice was low, controlled, but edged with something colder, something personal, her eyes locking onto his with unsettling clarity. You don't belong in his world. Her grip tightened just enough to hurt, just enough to make the warning real. Lior's fingers pressed weakly against the wall, trying to ground himself as the ache spread through his side. I didn't. The words barely formed before another shove cut them off, sharper this time, his body hitting the edge of the table, the pain flaring again, sharper, deeper, and for a moment his vision blurred. I've seen what happens when he loses control, Valerie continued, her voice dropping lower, quieter, but far more dangerous, and I won't let you be the reason. The words didn't sound like jealousy. They sounded like conviction, like something she believed in completely. Stay away from him. Her gaze hardened slightly. Or next time, I won't stop here. And then, enough. Everett's voice cut through the space, low, final, and everything shifted instantly. Valerie's hand released him, but the tension didn't disappear, it tightened instead. Everett stepped forward, not hurried, not loud, but absolute, his presence filling the space as he moved directly between them, his body blocking Lior completely without even looking back, as if that position had already been decided. You forget your place, Everett said quietly, and the lack of emotion in his tone was more dangerous than anger. Valerie didn't step back immediately, her gaze still locked on Lior past Everett's shoulder. He's a risk, she said, her voice steady, unyielding. You know that. Everett didn't answer right away, and for a fraction of a second, the silence stretched just enough to acknowledge the truth in it, before he shifted slightly, enough to close the distance fully, enough to remove Lior from her reach completely. He's under my protection, Everett said, his voice lower now, controlled but edged with something unmistakable. That includes from you. The words landed, heavy, final, and that was enough to make Valerie pause, just for a moment, before something in her expression tightened. Then start acting like yourself again, she replied, quieter now, but sharper, more personal, because this isn't you. Everett didn't respond, but something behind his eyes hardened slightly, enough to end it, enough to make the conversation over. Valerie stepped back slowly this time, but her gaze never left Lior, not even for a second, and that alone was enough to leave the warning unfinished. Everett didn't move immediately either, not until the space was clear, and only then did his attention shift, his gaze dropping slightly, scanning, assessing, precise, the faint sense still there, but different now, unstable. Are you hurt? The question came direct, closer than before, and Lior shook his head instinctively, even as his body protested, even as the dull ache in his ribs pulsed with every breath. I'm fine. The lie came easily, too easily, because it was easier than admitting anything else, easier than admitting that maybe she was right, maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe he was the problem. Everett didn't push, didn't argue, but his gaze lingered a second longer than necessary before he stepped back, distance returning, control settling again. And that was when Lior understood, not from what was said, but from what wasn't. The space between them had changed, the protection was still there, but something colder had slipped in around it, and that was enough. Enough to make the decision for him. The days that followed were quieter, more distant. Lior kept to himself, intentionally this time, avoiding the spaces Everett occupied, moving through the penthouse like a shadow instead of a presence, his focus shifting to the only thing he could control, clay beneath his fingers, shaping something that kept collapsing no matter how carefully he tried, reforming it again and again as if repetition alone could fix what refused to hold. Maybe they were right. The thought settled slowly, heavier each time it returned, and he didn't push it away, because part of him believed it too. Everett noticed the distance. Of course he did. But he didn't close it, didn't call him out, didn't force anything back into place, because maybe distance was easier, maybe it was safer. Until it wasn't. The message came late, short, precise. One of his men. Gone. Just like that. No warning, no time, just absence. And for the first time in a long time, Everett didn't move immediately, didn't react the way he always did, because something in him stalled, just enough to matter, and without thinking, without deciding, he turned, not toward the problem waiting for him, but somewhere else, someone else. The door opened without a sound, and Lior barely had time to look up before. Everett was already there, closer than he had been in days, his presence heavier now, quieter, something unspoken pressing against the space between them. Lior didn't ask, didn't speak, because he didn't need to. Everett stepped forward slowly, stopping just close enough before the distance disappeared again, his hand lifting, more deliberate than before settling against Lior's shoulder, grounding, steady. And then he didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned forward, his forehead lowering slightly, his weight shifting just enough to rest against him, not collapsing, not breaking, but close enough to feel real. close enough to admit something without words, and Lior stayed still, didn't move, didn't speak, just let him, his hands lifting slowly, resting lightly against Everett's back, not pulling him closer, but not letting him fall either. And in that quiet, in that space where neither of them said anything at all, neither of them let go. Valerie Kane didn't wait this time. She found him where Everett wouldn't, in the quiet corner of a studio room filled with unfinished shapes and half-formed ideas. Lear didn't hear her at first, his focus lost in the slow rhythm of his hands pressing into clay, trying to shape something steady out of something that refused to hold, until her voice cut through it, sharp, precise. "You're getting comfortable." Leor froze, his fingers stilling against the surface before he looked up, and there she was, standing at the entrance, composed, controlled, but with something colder sitting just beneath it. "I told you to stay away from him." Valerie stepped closer, her heels echoing softly against the floor, each step measured, deliberate. "Or did you think he meant it?" Leor didn't answer immediately, his gaze dropping for a second before lifting again, steadier this time. "I'm not. Not what?" Valerie cut him off, a faint, humorless smile touching her lips. "Not trying to get closer? Not trying to take advantage?" She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You really think I can't see it?" The words landed heavier this time, more personal. "The way you cling to him. The way he doesn't push you away." Leor's fingers tightened slightly against the clay, but he said nothing, because denying it felt pointless. "Let me make this simple for you." Valerie's voice lowered, losing even the hint of pretense. "Men like him don't fall for things like you." Her gaze sharpened, cutting. "Everything about this, it's just new to him." A pause, just long enough to let the words settle. Something different, something temporary. Leor's chest tightened slightly at that. But he kept still, kept quiet, because part of him already knew that might be true. Valerie stepped closer, stopping just within reach, her voice dropping further, colder now. "In this world," she continued, her tone flattening into something almost clinical, "it doesn't work the way you think it does." Her eyes flicked over him, deliberate, dismissive. "People don't accept things like this." The implication was clear, even without the words fully spoken. "So if you have any sense at all, you'll stop before it becomes a problem." Silence followed, heavy, stretching. Leor didn't respond right away, because for the first time, something clicked into place, not about Everett, but about this world. The way people looked, the way they reacted, the things left unsaid, and suddenly, it made sense. The distance, the silence, the unspoken lines he had crossed without realizing. "I understand," Leor said finally, his voice quiet, but steady, and that was enough. Valerie watched him for a second longer, as if trying to decide whether to believe it, before stepping back, just slightly. "Make sure you do," she said, turning without another word, leaving the silence behind her, and this time, it didn't feel the same. Leor didn't move immediately, his hand still, resting against the clay, but no longer shaping it, because the form had already collapsed again. Just like before, he stared at it for a moment, then slowly pulled his hands away, the thoughts settling deeper now, heavier than before. Maybe this was never meant to hold. The days after that changed again, quieter, more deliberate. Leor kept his distance completely this time, not just physically, but in everything else. Conversations cut short, presence reduced, as if erasing himself would make things simpler, safer. He focused on his work instead, losing himself in lines, in shapes, in anything that didn't require him to think about the space he wasn't supposed to occupy. But it wasn't enough, because no matter how much distance he created, his body didn't follow. The quiet need lingered, subtle at first, then harder to ignore. The absence of that familiar grounding becoming more noticeable with every passing hour, until eventually, it outweighed everything else, the hesitation, the logic, the decision to stay away. That night, the penthouse was quiet, almost too quiet. Everett hadn't returned yet, and Leor stood in the doorway of a room he had deliberately avoided for days, his hand tightening slightly at his side before he stepped in, slowly, carefully, as if crossing a line he had already drawn for himself. The space still carried a faint trace of something familiar, something that hadn't completely faded, and his breath caught slightly, his body reacting before he could stop it, drawn forward, closer, until the distance disappeared again. It wasn't enough, not like before, not like when Everett was there. But it was something his body recognized, something it needed. His fingers hovered for a moment before reaching out, hesitating just slightly before pulling a piece of clothing closer, the fabric still carrying a faint trace of warmth, of something that felt real in a way nothing else here did. Lior exhaled slowly, his grip tightening just a fraction as he sat back, the tension in his body easing just enough to breathe again. He didn't think about what it meant, didn't question it, because right now, it was the only thing that worked, and somewhere far from that quiet room, Everett paused for no reason he could explain, something in his chest shifting just slightly, like something had reached for him, even without him being there. Distance should have made things easier. That was the point of it. That was what Lior told himself every time he chose not to walk into a room he knew Everett was in. Every time he turned away before their paths could cross. Every time he forced himself to stay where he was instead of following something he couldn't explain. It should have worked, but it didn't. The days passed quieter, emptier. Lior filled them the only way he knew how. With work, with motion, with something he could control. Clay under his fingers, paint across unfinished canvases, shapes forming, breaking, reforming again, his hands moving constantly. Like stopping would force him to think, and thinking was the one thing he couldn't afford, because every time he did, it circled back to the same thing, the absence, the quiet, growing lack of something his body refused to ignore. It started small, just a flicker, a moment where his breath felt uneven for no reason, where his focus slipped without warning, where the world felt just slightly off, but it didn't stay small. It never did. The longer he stayed away, the more it built, subtle at first, then sharper, heavier, until it settled into something he couldn't push down anymore, a quiet need that didn't care about logic, didn't care about decisions he had already made. His fingers pressed harder into the clay without realizing, the shape collapsing again under the pressure, edges losing form before he could fix them. He stopped then, staring at it for a moment too long before pulling his hands away slowly, the same thought returning, uninvited, persistent. Maybe this was never meant to hold. Maybe distance wasn't enough. Maybe nothing would be. Lior exhaled slowly, his shoulders tightening slightly before he stood, moving without fully deciding. The path already familiar even if he had avoided it for days. The hallway was quiet, the penthouse dimmed under low light. And for a second, he stopped outside the door he had refused to open, his hand hovering just above it, hesitation flickering once before it disappeared. He stepped inside, slower this time, careful, like crossing a line he couldn't undo. The room felt different without him there, colder, emptier, but it still held something, faint, lingering, the last trace of something his body recognized instantly. And that was enough. Enough to make his breath catch slightly, enough to pull him forward without resistance. He moved deeper into the room, closer, until the distance disappeared again. But it wasn't enough, not like before, not like whenever it was there, not like when the warmth was real and immediate. His fingers curled slightly at his side before reaching out, slower this time, more deliberate, pulling a piece of clothing closer, the fabric still carrying a faint trace of that same grounding warmth, weaker now, but real. Lior sat down slowly, his grip tightening just a fraction as he leaned back, the tension in his body easing just enough to breathe. Again, but it didn't stop there, because once it started, it didn't fade. It grew, quiet, insistent, his movements becoming more automatic than intentional, gathering, pulling things closer, surrounding himself with whatever trace he could find, the space shifting around him, not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough to create something small, contained, something his body recognized as safe, as stable. His breathing slowed again, his eyes lowering slightly as the edge of tension finally dulled, just enough, and for the first time in hours, he relaxed, not fully, not completely, but enough to hold himself together. He didn't think about what it meant, didn't question why this was the only thing that worked, because thinking would only break it, and right now, he couldn't afford that. Time passed without him noticing, minutes, maybe longer, until the quiet shift came again, subtle, almost unnoticeable, the air changing just slightly, like something had entered the space without sound. Lior didn't react immediately, his body slower now, heavier, but something in him still registered it, the difference, the presence, and before he could move, before he could turn, "So this is where you've been." The voice came from the doorway, low, controlled, but edged with something darker, something that hadn't been there before. Lior froze, completely, his fingers tightening instinctively against the fabric he hadn't realized he was still holding, his breath catching just slightly before he turned, slowly, and Everett was there, standing at the entrance, still, composed, but his gaze wasn't the same. It moved once, taking in the room, the space, the subtle changes that didn't need to be explained to be understood, and then it settled on Lior, sharper now, heavier, something unreadable tightening beneath it. The silence stretched, longer than it should have, heavier than it needed to be, before Everett took a single step forward, slow, deliberate. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice lower now, quieter, but far more dangerous, and this time, it wasn't a question. The silence didn't last long. It never did when Everett Kane was involved. He stepped further into the room, slow, deliberate, his gaze sweeping once more before settling back on Lior, sharper now, heavier, like he was piecing something together he hadn't wanted to see before. "You've been avoiding me," he repeated, his voice low, controlled, and this time, there was no distance left between them. Lior's fingers tightened unconsciously around the fabric in his hands, his breath catching, slightly before he forced himself to answer. "I thought it was better." Everett's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, something darker, something closer to frustration than anything Lior had seen from him before. "Better?" he echoed, taking another step forward. "For who?" The question landed harder than it should have, and Lior didn't have an answer, not one that wouldn't sound like weakness, like something he was trying to hide. Everett didn't wait for one either, his gaze dropping briefly, taking in everything that didn't need explaining, the scattered traces, the space Lior had shaped around himself, and something in his expression tightened. "You came here for this?" His voice lowered further, quieter now, but far more dangerous. Lior hesitated, just for a second, before nodding slightly, because denying it would be pointless. Everett exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something else entirely, something harder to contain. "And you thought staying away from me would fix it?" His hand moved before Lior could react, fingers closing around his wrist, not rough, but firm enough to pull him up, to close the distance completely. "Look at me." Lior did, reluctantly at first, then fully, because there was no avoiding it now. Not when Everett was this close, not when the scent hit him again, stronger, immediate, undoing everything he had tried to hold together for days. His breath faltered, his body leaning forward without permission, and this time, Everett didn't step back, didn't hesitate, his other hand lifting, steadying him, grounding him, the space between them disappearing completely. "You're not a trap," Everett said, his voice lower now, steadier, but not untouched. "And you're not here because someone sent you." The words were simple, direct, but they landed deeper than anything else he could have said. Lior stilled, just for a second, the tension in his chest shifting into something else, something fragile. "Then why?" His voice broke slightly, quieter now. "Why me?" Everett didn't answer immediately, his gaze holding Lior's, searching, measuring, before something in it finally settled. Something clear, something certain. "I don't know," he said honestly, and that alone made it heavier. "I've never felt this before." His hand tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to keep him there. "Not with anyone." Lior's breath caught, his thoughts stalling completely. "I'm not." Everett cut himself off, just for a second, as if the words didn't quite fit. "This isn't something I do." His jaw tightened slightly. "You're the exception." The room went quiet after that, but not empty, not distant. Something had shifted, something that didn't need to be said out loud anymore, and Lior felt it, in the way Everett didn't step away, in the way his grip didn't loosen, in the way the space between them stayed exactly as it was, and this time, Lior didn't move back either. He leaned in instead, slowly, instinctively, closing the last distance on his own, and that was enough. Everett's control slipped again, but not the same way as before, not uncertain, not conflicted, his hand moving to steady, to hold, to keep him there as the tension between them shifted into something deeper, something quieter, their breaths slowing, matching, the world outside the room fading again, replaced by warmth, proximity, the quiet certainty of something neither of them tried to deny. Anymore, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't forced, just a slow unraveling of distance that had already been breaking for days, until there was nothing left of it at all. And for the first time, neither of them questioned it. Time blurred again, stretching, softening, until the tension finally eased, the weight of it settling into something steadier, something real. Everett didn't move immediately after, his hand still resting against Leor, his presence still close, like stepping away wasn't something he wanted to do just yet. Stay, he said quietly, not a command this time, just something softer, something closer to what it meant, and Leor didn't hesitate, not anymore. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before, it was different now, quieter, steadier, until Everett finally stepped back, just enough, reaching for something nearby before holding it out. You left this. Leor blinked slightly, taking it, his fingers brushing against the edge of a canvas he hadn't realized was missing. He looked down at it, then back up, confusion flickering briefly. You saw it. Everett didn't answer right away, his gaze shifting for just a second. I don't understand it, he admitted, his tone as direct as always. But he paused, searching for something that didn't come easily to him. It feels like something. And that was enough. More than enough. Leor's fingers tightened slightly around the canvas, something warmer settling in his chest this time, something that didn't hurt. I know someone, Everett added after a moment, his tone returning to something more familiar, more controlled, a gallery owner. Leor looked up again, startled this time. I'll have them take a look. Everett continued, as if it was already decided, as if it had never been a question, and for a moment, Leor didn't respond, because this felt like something else entirely, something beyond everything that had happened before, something that meant more than just staying, more than just surviving. And for the first time since he arrived in this world, it felt like he might actually have a place in it. It didn't go back to what it was before. It became something else entirely, quieter on the surface, but deeper in ways neither of them tried to name. Everett stayed more than he used to. Not always, not perfectly, but enough for Leor to notice, enough to leave a trace of warmth where there had only been absence before, and yet his world never slowed. Not for this, not for anyone. There were still nights he didn't come back, still mornings where the silence stretched too long, and when he did return, it was never untouched. The scent of iron clung to him more heavily now, sharper, harder to ignore, and Leor felt it every time, before he even turned, before he even saw him. You're hurt. The words came quietly, but without hesitation this time. Everett paused in the doorway, his jacket still on, his expression unchanged. It's nothing. The answer was the same, but something about it felt thinner now, less final than before. Leor stepped closer anyway, not stopping this time, his fingers brushing lightly against Everett's arm, grounding, checking, staying. It's never nothing, he said softly, and for a second, Everett didn't move, didn't pull away, his gaze lingering just a fraction longer than it should have, before he exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to let it happen, to let Leor stay, to let the quiet concern settle into something he didn't push aside anymore. He didn't explain, didn't justify, but he didn't stop him either, and that alone was new. That alone was enough to change the space between them. Days later, Everett didn't ask this time. He just said, "Get ready," his tone leaving no room for refusal, and Leor followed, the drive silent but steady, until the car stopped in front of a gallery washed in natural light. Glass walls reflecting something softer than the world they had come from. You wanted work, Everett said simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. Inside, the air felt different, open, filled with quiet intention, and when the voice came from deeper within, it carried warmth Everett never did. You actually came. The man stepped into view with easy familiarity, his presence lighter, but his eyes sharp, observant, landing on Leor with immediate interest. And you didn't come alone, he added, a faint smile forming. Adrian Vale. He introduced himself, already stepping closer, his attention fixed on Leor in a way that felt too direct to ignore. Everett didn't entertain it, simply handing over the canvas without explanation. Look at it. Adrian took it, curiosity flickering into something else entirely as his eyes moved across the surface. The shift in his expression immediate, unmistakable, the room falling quieter around him as he studied it longer than expected. This doesn't belong in a small gallery, he said finally, his voice lower now, more serious, the lightness gone. This belongs somewhere people actually feel something. His gaze lifted back to Lior, sharper now, genuinely impressed. You didn't just bring me talent, he added, glancing briefly at Everett. You brought me something rare. He stepped closer again. Too close. The warmth in his tone returning just enough to make it dangerous. And you're just letting him stay hidden? Everett's gaze shifted then, colder this time, more deliberate. Adrian. The name alone carried enough weight to still the moment, but Adrian didn't step back immediately, his smile lingering, testing. What? He said lightly. I'm just saying, he's not for you. Everett cut in, his voice low, controlled, but final, and that was enough. Something in Adrian's expression stilled, the teasing fading just slightly into something more observant, more understanding. I see, he said after a moment. Softer now, his gaze flicking between them once before settling. So that's how it is. The conversation shifted after that. Easier, more professional, Adrian already talking about placements, introductions, possibilities that extended far beyond this one room. But Lior's attention drifted, not to the words, but to the quiet shift in his chest, something warmer, steadier, something that hadn't been there before. And when they stepped outside again, the air cooler, the noise softer, the question surfaced before he could stop it. People here don't really accept this, do they? His voice was quieter now, but clearer than before. Everett didn't answer immediately, his gaze forward, steady, before it. Shifted slightly. Some don't, he said. And then, without pause, without hesitation, the rest don't matter. Lior exhaled slowly, something in his chest loosening, not disappearing, but settling, the weight of it shifting into something he could carry, something he didn't have to run from anymore. And beside him, Everett didn't move away, didn't create distance, his presence steady, unchanged, as if this choice, this space between them, wasn't something he was willing to let go. And for the first time since Lior arrived in this world, it didn't feel like something he had to question anymore. It felt like something he could stay in. The changes didn't come all at once, they never did. They slipped in quietly, easy to ignore if he wanted to. Lior noticed it first in the smallest ways. Meals left unfinished without thinking, flavors turning dull or wrong the moment they touched his tongue. And then the nausea came, sharp and sudden, catching him off guard in the middle of something ordinary, forcing him to stop, to breathe through it until it passed. He told himself it was stress, adjustment, anything that made more sense. Then the truth his mind refused to consider, because there was no place for that truth here, not in a world without alphas, not without the one condition that made it possible, and Everett. Everett wasn't. He cut the thought off again, the same way he always did, because thinking about it didn't change anything, didn't explain why his body felt like it was shifting in ways he couldn't control, or why the quiet needs still lingered beneath everything else. Outside, nothing had changed, not visibly. Everett's protection hadn't loosened. If anything, it had tightened. Lior was never alone when he stepped beyond the penthouse. Never without the quiet presence of people watching, guarding, unseen but always there. A system that worked so seamlessly it felt invisible, until the moment it didn't. The day started like any other. The car already waiting, the route already cleared, the team in place, everything exactly where it should be. And still, something fell off. Not enough to name, just enough to linger. Lior hesitated for a second before stepping forward, his gaze flicking once down the corridor, and for a brief moment, he saw her, Valerie Kane, standing near the far end, posture straight, expression unreadable. Their eyes met just for a second, and something flickered there, something that didn't belong, but it was gone before he could place it. The door closed behind him, the world narrowing into movement, routine, control, until it broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just a shift, a delay that shouldn't have been there. 1 second too long between signals, one gap in a system that never allowed gaps, and that was all it took. The first impact came from the side, sudden, calculated, the kind that didn't aim to injure but to disorient. Lior staggered, the air leaving his lungs as his body reacted too slowly. Voices cut through the moment, sharp, coordinated. Now, someone said, and everything moved at once, shadows where there hadn't been any, hands grabbing, pulling, the controlled rhythm of protection collapsing into something else entirely. Lior tried to pull back, tried to move, but his body wasn't responding the way it should, the lingering weakness slowing him down at the worst possible moment. He caught a glimpse of one of Everett's men going down, not outmatched, just caught at the wrong angle, wrong second. And then he saw her again, Valerie, just beyond the edge of it all, still within range, still in position, her gaze locked on him. And for a moment, everything stilled, the noise, the movement, the space between them narrowing into that single look. She could have stepped in, could have closed the distance, could have ended it there, and he knew it, the certainty of it settling in the same instant. He saw the hesitation in her eyes, just a fraction, just enough to matter, and then she didn't move. The moment passed, the gap widened, and the system failed, not completely, but enough for the world to tilt, for the hold on him to tighten, for the last line of defense to disappear before it could reform. After that, everything blurred, motion without direction, sound without clarity, until it stopped. And when Lior opened his eyes again, the space around him had changed. Colder, heavier, the kind of place that didn't belong to Everett. So, the voice came from ahead, smooth, measured, carrying an ease that didn't fit the situation at all. This is the one. Lior lifted his head slowly, his body still heavy, slower than it should have been, and the man standing there didn't look like chaos. He looked like control, sharp, composed, his presence cutting in a way that felt dangerously similar to Everett, but without restraint. I was expecting something less, the man continued, stepping closer, his gaze settling fully on Lior now, assessing, calculating. And yet, here we are. His eyes narrowed slightly, curiosity replacing indifference. Elias Varn. He introduced himself casually, like this was nothing more than a meeting. You're the reason Everett Kane is starting to slip. Lior didn't answer, didn't react, his fingers tightening slightly against the surface beneath him, grounding himself the only way he could. Elias circled once, slow, deliberate. You don't look like much, he added lightly, but you've already done more damage than most people ever could. He stepped closer then, just enough, and that was when he felt it. Something faint, something almost imperceptible in the air, a trace most people would miss, but not him. His expression shifted slightly, interest sharpening into something far more focused. What is that? He murmured, leaning in just a fraction more, confirming what he had already suspected, something new, something rare, something that didn't belong in a world like this, and that alone made it valuable. Lior felt the difference immediately, the wrongness of it, the similarity that wasn't the same, the scent structure. Familiar but distorted, twisting into something his body rejected outright, his stomach tightening sharply, the nausea rising faster than before. Stay back, Lior said, his voice strained now, pulling away instinctively, but Elias only smiled faintly, as if the reaction made him more interesting, not less. You don't like me, he noted, almost amused, stepping closer anyway, ignoring the distance Lior tried to create. That's inconvenient. His hand lifted, not touching, but close enough to threaten it, and that was enough. The reaction came instantly, violent, uncontrollable. Lior's body folded in on itself as the nausea surged, sharper, deeper, stronger than before, his breath breaking as the world tilted, the strength leaving him all at once. And when it didn't stop, when everything only got worse, darkness followed, quiet, final. The voices came first when awareness returned, distant, fragmented. This isn't a normal reaction, someone said, clinical, uncertain. Check again. Another voice responded, followed by a pause that stretched too long, before the answer came, quieter, but absolute. There's no error. The words settled slowly, heavy, until they meant something, until they became something real. He's pregnant. And just like that, the room shifted, the air tightening around the statement, and Elias Varn went completely still, the curiosity in his expression deepening into something far more dangerous, something sharper, as if what stood before him had just become something else entirely, something he hadn't planned for, and now couldn't ignore. The moment Everett returned, something was wrong, not visibly, not immediately, but in the way the silence settled too quickly, too completely. The penthouse never felt empty like this. His steps slowed just slightly as his gaze swept the room, precise, automatic, noting everything that hadn't changed, and the one thing that had. Where is he? The question came low, controlled, but heavy enough to tighten the air instantly. No one answered right away, and that was the first mistake, Everett's. Gaze sharpened, colder now. Report. This time it wasn't a question. The response came quickly, but not clean. There was an interruption. Everett didn't react, didn't raise his voice, and that was worse, because the stillness meant he was already calculating, already reconstructing every second that had gone wrong. Show me. The words were quiet, but absolute. The footage came up within seconds, angles shifting, time compressing into something easier to read. The route, the timing, the delay, the 1 second gap that shouldn't have existed, and then, her, Valerie Kane, still within range, still in position, and not moving. The screen went dark before anyone could speak. Everyone out, Everett said. Level. Final. The room emptied instantly. Except one. Valerie remained where she was. You saw it, she said quietly. Everett didn't answer immediately, his gaze still fixed on the blank screen. You hesitated, he said at last, the words measured, precise. Valerie's jaw tightened slightly. I assessed the situation, she replied, steady, controlled. It wasn't that simple. Everett turned. Then, and for the first time, something in his eyes wasn't neutral. It was, he said quietly. You were in range. The certainty in it cut deeper than anger. Valerie held his gaze. But something shifted there, smaller than guilt, but close. He's a risk, she said again. You know that. Everett didn't respond at first, the silence stretching heavy between them. Before he spoke again, slower this time, more deliberate. So you made a decision. Valerie didn't deny it. Not fully. I made the only one that protected you, she said. And that was when something changed, not loud, not explosive, just a shift, something colder settling behind Everett's eyes. You don't get to decide that. His voice dropped, controlled to the point of danger. Not for me. Valerie stepped back first this time, just slightly, acknowledging the line she had crossed. Everett didn't say anything else, didn't need to. The decision had already been made. Trace everything, he said as he turned away, his tone sharper now. I want every second accounted for. Systems came alive instantly, voices overlapping, data flooding in, and Everett moved with it. Faster now, more focused. This wasn't random, it wasn't luck, it was planned, precise, and that meant one thing. Elias Varn. The name left his lips quietly, but it stilled the room for a fraction of a second. Prepare the team, Everett added, his voice steady, but something beneath it had shifted completely now. Something darker, something far less restrained. We're going to end this. And for the first time, he didn't think about control, didn't think about consequences, because whatever line had been crossed, he wasn't stepping back from it again. And somewhere far from that controlled chaos, time moved differently, slower, heavier, the air itself feeling wrong no matter how still everything appeared. But didn't know how long he had been there. Only that nothing felt stable, not his body, not the space around him, not the quiet that pressed in from every side. Elias Varn stepped into it like he belonged there, unhurried, composed, his gaze settling on Lior with a kind of interest that didn't bother to hide itself. You're more interesting than I expected, he said lightly, circling once, his presence closing in without permission. At first, I thought you were just leverage, he continued, almost amused, something to pull Everett out into the open. He stopped just short of him, close enough for the tension to shift instantly. But now, this feels like a bonus. Lior didn't respond, his fingers tightening at his side as he forced himself to stay still, not to react. But his body betrayed him anyway, pulling back. Instinctively, the space between them shrinking no matter how much he tried to create it. Elias tilted his head slightly, watching, studying. Tell me, he said, voice lowering just enough to sharpen. Does he know? The question lingered, deliberate. Or is this something he hasn't figured out yet? Lior's breath tightened, but he stayed silent, and that silence was answer enough. Elias's expression shifted, interest deepening. So he doesn't, he murmured, almost thoughtful. That complicates things, or maybe it makes them simpler. He stepped closer again, ignoring the way Lior recoiled. If I already have what matters most. The implication settled heavily in the air, suffocating. You don't belong to him, Lior said quietly, forcing the words out despite the way his stomach twisted again. Elias paused for a fraction of a second, then smiled faintly. Right now, you belong to whoever holds you. His hand lifted slightly, not touching, but close enough to make the threat real. And I'm starting to think Everett isn't the only one who could make use of that. The wrongness of it hit immediately. The scent, the proximity, everything about him pressing in the wrong direction. Lior's stomach turned sharply, the nausea rising faster this time, harder to contain. Stay away, he said again, quieter now, strained, but firm. Elias watched him closely, not the words, but the reaction, the way his body rejected him instead of responding, and that seemed to interest him more than anything else. You're not reacting the way I expected, he said slowly, curiosity sharpening. Most people don't push back like this. Lior couldn't answer, his body folding slightly as the nausea surged again. Stronger, faster, his breath breaking as he turned away, and that was when Elias noticed it properly. Not the resistance, but the weakness beneath it, something physical, something deeper than fear. Get a doctor, he said suddenly, the amusement gone, replaced by calculation. Now, the room shifted instantly, voices moving, tests running, time compressing again into something clinical, precise, until the answer came back unchanged, undeniable. There's no error, the doctor said, quieter now. He's pregnant. The words fell into the silence like something solid, something real, and in that same moment, miles away, Everett's gaze lifted sharply, as if something unseen had just shifted out of place, something that didn't need to be explained to be understood, and in the space between those two moments, everything changed. Everett didn't move until the plan was complete in his head, not just the entry, but every possible exit, every contingency mapped against a man who didn't make mistakes. Elias Varn didn't leave openings, so Everett created one. 3 minutes, he said quietly, and the team moved like a single organism, pressure splitting across multiple points, controlled fractures. In a system designed not to break. Inside, the shift came before the sound. Elias noticed it in the rhythm first, the subtle misalignment that shouldn't exist. He's here, he murmured, almost amused, as if this had always been inevitable, his gaze settling back on Lior, who was weaker now, the instability no longer subtle. You should feel honored, Elias added lightly, stepping closer without permission. Not many people are worth this level of response. Lior didn't answer, his body pulling back instinctively, breath uneven, the nausea still lingering beneath the surface. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, and then the door opened. Not shattered, not forced, just removed as if it had never mattered. Everett stepped in, and the room changed, not with noise, but with presence. His gaze locked onto Lior instantly, scanning, confirming, alive, conscious, and only then did Elias exist. Step away from him, Everett said, low, controlled, but edged with something final. Elias didn't move. If anything, his interest sharpened. You came yourself, he said calmly. That's not like you. Everett didn't respond yet, his focus still on Lior, on the way he held himself, on something deeper that didn't belong there, something wrong. And that was when Elias spoke again, quieter, more deliberate. You didn't know, did you? Everett stilled, just for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. Elias saw it, understood it instantly, his smile sharpening slightly. That explains everything, he murmured. You're risking everything, without even understanding what you're protecting. The words settled heavy, suffocating, and something inside Everett snapped into place, colder, sharper, less restrained. Move, he said. And this time it wasn't a warning. It was a decision. Elias moved first, not to retreat, but to pull Lior back into the line between them, tightening his grip just enough to make the threat real. The distance collapsed instantly. Everett closed it faster. The first strike clean, precise, controlled, not wild, not wasted, both of them calculating even in motion, a fight built on angles and timing, not force, and for a moment, Elias held it, not stronger, not faster, just positioned correctly. Careful, Elias said, almost amused. You might break something you didn't know you had. Everett didn't slow, his next movement forcing a shift, forcing Elias to adjust, the hold on Lior slipping. Just slightly, just enough. Everett reached, fingers brushing Lior's sleeve, and then Elias pulled him back again, harder this time, dragging him out of reach, and that was when it happened. Lior's body gave out mid-motion, the nausea hitting violently. Uncontrollable, his breath breaking as he folded. The reaction immediate and raw. Everett saw it clearly now. Not just weakness, something deeper, something he hadn't known, hadn't been told, and that single fraction of hesitation cost him. Elias regained position instantly, pulling Lior closer, using the instability against him. There it is, Elias said softly. Interest sharpening into something far more dangerous. You really didn't know. Everett's gaze snapped back, darker now, something far less controlled rising beneath it. Let him go, he said, and this time the words carried weight, not negotiation. Consequence. Elias studied him for a second longer, measuring, calculating, and then something in his expression shifted, not retreat, not surrender, decision. You'll take him anyway, he said calmly. So why pretend this ends here? His grip loosened. Just enough, and then tightened again suddenly. One last test. One last pull that dragged Lior out of Everett's reach for a heartbeat too long. And in that heartbeat, Everett made the choice, not to strike, not to finish it, but to let the opening go, his hand closing fully around Lior instead, pulling him free, anchoring him against his chest, abandoning the fight to secure him. And that was the moment everything shifted. Elias saw it, understood it instantly, the line Everett wouldn't cross. There it is, he said again, quieter this time, more certain. Your weakness. Everett didn't respond, didn't rise to it. Because none of it mattered. Not anymore. Not when Lior's weight was real against him. Not when his breathing was still uneven, fragile. Stay with me, Everett said low, close, his voice the only steady thing in the room. Lior's fingers tightened weakly against him, enough to confirm he was still there, and that was all Everett needed. He moved immediately, turning toward the exit without hesitation, because the objective had already changed. Outside, the operation was collapsing into something sharper, faster, the controlled structure tightening under pressure, and then it broke again, not from the enemy, but from within. The shot came from an angle Everett's team hadn't covered, precise, deliberate. Everett shifted instantly, pulling Lior closer, but the second shot never came, because it never fired. The silence that followed was abrupt, wrong, and when Everett's gaze snapped toward the source, he saw her, Valerie Kane, standing in the line of fire, her weapon lowered, the threat already neutralized at her feet. Move, she said sharply, not looking at him. Not yet. They're collapsing the perimeter. Everett didn't question it, didn't slow, he adjusted instantly, moving through the path. She opened without hesitation, because whatever had happened before, this was the choice she was making now. Valerie fell in behind them, not close enough to interfere, but not far enough to step away. The rest of the extraction moved fast, faster than planned, because the window was closing, and when they finally broke through the last line, when the car door sealed shut behind them, everything else dropped away, leaving only what mattered. Lior was still breathing, uneven but real. Everett's hand didn't leave him, not for a second. His focus locked entirely on him now. Everything else secondary, and for the first time since this began, he didn't think about the fight, didn't think about Elias, didn't think about control, because none of it mattered more than this, not anymore. And across from him, Valerie didn't speak, didn't try to justify what she had done, or what she hadn't, because she already knew. Whatever came next, she would answer for all of it. The quiet didn't break when the doctor stepped closer. It tightened, like the air itself had to make room for something that didn't belong. His gaze moved from the chart back to Lior, then to Everett, and for the first time since he entered the room, uncertainty showed, subtle, but unmistakable. There's no medical precedent for this, he said slowly, choosing each word with care. Not in this system, not with this biology. His fingers hovered over the data again as if checking it would change something. There's no record of male pregnancy under these conditions. Everett didn't interrupt, didn't question, but something in his expression sharpened. Colder now, more focused. Explain, he said quietly, and the doctor hesitated just long enough to make it clear he didn't have a complete answer. From what I can see, his body isn't reacting like anyone we know, he continued. More clinical now. Hormonal patterns, internal responses, they don't match any classification. His gaze returned to Lior. It's as if he's from a different system entirely. The words settled into the room, heavier than intended, and this time, Lior didn't look away, didn't retreat, because there was nothing left to hide. Not now. I am, he said quietly. The admission simple, but it shifted everything. Everett's gaze snapped back to him instantly, not shocked, but intent. What do you mean? He asked, not doubting, just needing to understand. And Lior exhaled slowly. like he had been holding it in since the beginning. Where I come from, people are different, he said, voice steady despite the weight of it. There are alphas, betas, omegas. The words sounded foreign in the room, out of place, and yet they carried something too precise to dismiss. I'm an omega, he added, quieter now, and that was when the silence changed again, not empty, but absorbing. Everett didn't speak, didn't interrupt, he just listened, fully, for the first time. We can get pregnant, Lior continued, his gaze dropping slightly, not from shame, but from the memory of it. It's normal there. A pause, his fingers tightening slightly against the sheet. But not here. The last part came softer, more uncertain, and that uncertainty finally showed, breaking through the composure he had held onto for too long. I thought, it couldn't happen, he admitted, the words rougher now, more fragile, not without. He stopped, not finishing the sentence. But he didn't need to. Everett already understood more than enough. Too much. The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't heavy with confusion. It was something else, something that settled deeper. Everett stepped closer, slower now, more deliberate, as if every movement had to mean something. You should have told me, he said quietly, but there was no accusation in it, only something closer to regret. And Lior shook his head slightly, a small movement, but firm. I didn't think you'd believe me, he said, the truth of it too simple to argue with. And even if you did, his voice faltered for the first time, I didn't think you'd accept it. The words landed harder than anything before, because they weren't about biology, they were about him. Everett didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, the silence stretched, not empty, but full of everything he hadn't said yet, everything he hadn't realized until now. And when he did speak, it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was steady. You almost died out there, he said, the shift unexpected, but not misplaced. Lior stilled at that, caught off guard by the direction. And I wasn't there. Everett continued, his voice lower now, more controlled, but something beneath it had cracked. I knew the risks. A pause, heavier this time. I still let it happen. That was the truth of it. Not dressed up, not softened, and it hit harder because of that. Lior's breath caught slightly. That's not. He started, but Everett shook his head once, cutting it off, not dismissing, but refusing to let it be less than it was. It is, he said, quieter now, but no less certain. I should have protected you better. The admission settled into the space between them, raw, unfiltered, and for the first time, it wasn't about control, it wasn't about strength, it was about failure, and that alone changed everything. Lior looked at him then, fully, not searching for distance anymore, but trying to understand something he hadn't expected to find. You came for me, he said softly. Everett didn't deny it, didn't soften it. I will always come for you. The words came without hesitation, without condition, and that was when something inside Lior finally broke, not painfully, but quietly. The tension he had been holding on to slipping just enough to let something else through, something warmer, something steadier. Even now, Lior said after a moment, his voice smaller than before, after everything. Everett didn't look away, didn't hesitate. Especially now. He answered, and that was when the fear surfaced. Not hidden anymore, not controlled, just real. I was scared, Lior admitted, the words barely above a whisper. Not of them, he added, shaking his head slightly. Of you. Everett stilled at that, just for a second, enough to matter. I thought. Lior's voice faltered, but he didn't stop this time. I thought if you knew, you'd let me go. The honesty of it cut deeper than anything else. And for a moment, Everett didn't move, didn't speak, because there was no immediate answer to that. Only the truth he hadn't fully understood until now. Look at me, he said finally, quieter than before. And Lior did, slowly, uncertainly. Everett's gaze held his, steady, unwavering. I'm not letting you go, he said, the words simple, but absolute. Not because of this. His hand shifted slightly, grounding, deliberate. Not in spite of it. His voice lowered, softer now, but stronger in a different way. Because of you. The distinction settled slowly, reshaping something that had been fragile moments before. Lior's breath unsteady. His defenses gone now, not broken, just no longer needed. And the child, he said, barely there. Everett didn't hesitate. Not this time. Mine. The word came again, just as certain, just as final, not claimed through blood, but through choice, through presence, through everything that had led to this moment. And this time, Lior didn't question it, didn't pull away, he let it stay, let it exist, because for the first time since he arrived in this world, it didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt real, and Everett didn't move, didn't step back, his hand steady against him, his presence unchanged, as if there was nothing left to decide, nothing left to prove, because this was already chosen. For a while after that, nothing in Everett Kane's world became peaceful, but somehow, Lior did, not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, in quiet pieces, in mornings where he woke to the scent of dark wood and leather lingering beside him, in nights where Everett came home late and still crossed the room first just to check if he was sleeping well, in the way every dangerous thing outside the penthouse was handled before it could reach him, not with panic, not with noise, but with the ruthless precision of a man who had already decided what mattered. Most, Elias Varn did not disappear. Men like him never truly did, but Everett made sure he understood the cost of reaching for what belonged under his protection. Routes were changed, networks were cut, loyalties were tested, and one by one, every hand Elias had placed near Lior was removed from the board, quietly, permanently, without giving him the satisfaction of another confrontation. But inside the penthouse, there was still one thing left unresolved, and it came in the form of Valerie. Kane standing at the doorway of the studio, no weapon, no command, no cold warning this time, just silence. Lior noticed her reflection first in the glass beside an unfinished canvas, his hand slowing over the brush before he turned, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Valerie looked different somehow, not weaker, never weak, but stripped of certainty, as if the belief that had carried her for years had finally cracked enough for something human to show through. "I owe you an apology," she said, the words stiff, difficult, but real. Lior didn't answer immediately, not because he wanted to punish her, but because part of him still remembered the hallway, the hesitation, the single second where she could have saved him and didn't. Valerie seemed to understand that, because she didn't step closer. "I told myself I was protecting him," she continued, quieter now, but that wasn't all it was. Her fingers tightened once at her side. "I was jealous, and I let that matter when it shouldn't have." The admission settled between them, heavy but clean. Lior looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "I was afraid of you," he said honestly, and Valerie's expression tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. "I know," she replied. "You had every reason to be." Silence returned, but this time it didn't cut. It softened, just slightly. "I can't undo what happened," Valerie said, "but I can make sure it never happens again." Lior's gaze lowered briefly to his own hand resting over the small curve of his stomach, and when he looked up again, there was no innocence in his eyes, no easy forgiveness, only a quiet strength that had grown from everything he survived. "Then don't protect Everett from me," he said softly. "Protect what he loves." Valerie stilled at that, as if the words reached somewhere she hadn't expected, and then, slowly, she nodded, not like a subordinate obeying an order, but like someone accepting a truth. "I will," she said, and from that day forward, things changed, not into friendship right away, not into something simple, but into something steadier. Valerie no longer looked at Lior like a weakness. She looked at him like a responsibility she had, chosen with open eyes. And when the months passed, when Lior's body grew softer, heavier, when the child beneath his heart became impossible to ignore, Valerie became the shadow closest to him whenever Everett could not be there. Never warm exactly, never gentle in the usual way, but careful, precise, almost painfully attentive. She checked cars twice, dismissed anyone who looked too long, and once, when a guest at the penthouse made a careless remark about Lior's place at Everett's side, Valerie looked at him with the same cold calm she had once used on enemies and said, "Choose your next words as if you want to keep using them." After that, no one questioned him again. Everett noticed, of course he did, but he said nothing, only watched the fragile truce become something stronger, something built not from forgetting, but from choosing differently. Meanwhile, Lior found himself returning to art with a hunger that surprised even him. Pregnancy slowed his body, but it sharpened something else. His paintings changed, softened in some places, deepened in others, filled with strange light, half memory, half longing. shapes that looked like doorways, hands, rain, warmth, worlds collapsing, and reforming around one steady presence. Adrian Vale was the first to see the new series, and for once, he didn't tease, didn't flirt, didn't smile too easily. He simply stood in front of the largest canvas for a long time before saying, "This is the one." Lior blinked, nervous despite everything. The one for what? Adrian turned to him, eyes bright with the kind of certainty only artists and gamblers shared. "The new Contemporary Vision Award," he said. "You're entering." Lior almost laughed because it sounded impossible. Too large, too public, too far from the boy who had once woken in a world that denied his existence. But Everett, standing quietly behind him, only said, "Enter," as if the matter had already been settled. Lior turned to him. "What if I lose?" Everett looked at the painting, then back at him, calm as ever. "Then they're wrong." Adrian laughed at that, delighted, but Lior didn't laugh. Not at first, because the simplicity of Everett's faith hit harder than praise ever could. So he entered, and weeks later, in a hall filled with critics, collectors, curators, and artists whose names he was still learning, Lior Ash won first prize, not a small mention, not a symbolic encouragement, but first place. The judges spoke of emotional architecture, of memory rendered through form, of tenderness without weakness, of a voice unlike anything currently moving through the city's art scene. Lior stood under the lights, stunned, one hand instinctively resting over his stomach, the other holding the award like it might vanish if he breathed too hard. And from the crowd, Everett watched him with a stillness that fooled everyone except those who knew him best. Because his eyes gave him away, not soft exactly, not openly sentimental, but proud in a way so intense it almost looked dangerous. Valerie stood beside him, arms crossed, expression cool, but when Adrian whispered, "Your boy just conquered the room," she answered without looking away. Obviously, the exhibition followed 2 months later at Adrian's gallery, and it was nothing like the quiet studio where Lior had once hidden from the world. People came in waves, critics, collectors, gallery owners, young, painters, old sculptors, journalists, all drawn by the strange beauty of the work, by the story they could feel but not fully name. The centerpiece was a painting Lior had titled "A World That Held Me." A vast canvas of shadow and gold, rain-soft whites, dark wood tones, and a small figure standing between two realities, not lost anymore, just choosing where to stay. People stood before it in silence, some for minutes, some longer, and for the first time, Lior didn't feel like a mistake placed in the wrong world. He felt seen, not as a secret, not as a body to be protected, not as something impossible, but as himself. When the evening ended and the crowd thinned, Everett came to stand beside him, his hand settling at the small of Lior's back, careful, familiar, grounding. "You did this," he said quietly. Lior looked at the room, at the paintings, at Adrian beaming near the entrance, at Valerie quietly redirecting anyone who got too close, and then back at Everett. "We did," he said. Everett's expression didn't change much, but his hand tightened just slightly, enough for Lior to feel the answer. By the time their daughter was born, the city was quiet with rain, as if the world had softened itself for her arrival. Everett had faced gunfire, betrayal, blood, and power without blinking. But the moment the doctor placed that tiny crying bundle into his arms, he froze completely. Not because he was afraid of enemies, not because he didn't know what to do in danger, but because she was impossibly small, impossibly real, with dark lashes, a fierce little cry, and fingers that curled around his thumb like she had already decided he belonged to her. "Everett," Lior whispered, exhausted but smiling. "Breathe." And only then did Everett realize he hadn't. He drew in one slow breath, eyes fixed on the baby, expression unreadable except for the way his entire body had gone still around her. "She's loud," he said finally, voice low, almost stunned. Lior laughed weakly, tears gathering in his eyes. "She's your daughter." Everett looked up at him then, and something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. "Ours," he said, and Lior broke into the softest smile. They named her Alara Kane, because Adrian insisted a child born from two worlds deserved a name that sounded like a star, and though Everett pretended not to care, he used it first, quietly, when he thought no one was listening. "Alara," he murmured, and the baby stopped crying, just for a second, as if recognizing the voice that had already sworn the world would never touch her. From that day on, the most feared man in the city became helpless in the most ridiculous ways. Meetings were delayed because Alara had fallen asleep gripping his finger. Men waited in silence outside his office because their boss was inside walking slow circles with a baby against his chest. Entire negotiations shifted around nap times, and once, when a lieutenant suggested that perhaps the child's nursery did not need a security system stronger than a private vault, Everett looked at him so coldly the man apologized before finishing the sentence. Leor watched all of it with a warmth that sometimes hurt. Everett Kane, who once claimed he did not believe in family, now inspected bottle temperatures with the seriousness of a weapons deal, learned the difference between 3 types of crying, and held his daughter like she was both the most fragile thing in the world and the only force capable of commanding him completely. Valerie, to everyone's surprise, became Alara's most terrifying guardian, standing beside the crib like a soldier at a royal gate. And when Leor once found her awkwardly holding a stuffed rabbit while Alara blinked up at her, Valerie said, without expression, she demanded it. Though Alara was only 3 months old, Adrian visited often, bringing absurdly expensive tiny outfits and claiming he was the child's cultural education, while Everett banned anything with glitter after one disastrous afternoon, and then secretly kept the first glitter-covered drawing Leor made with Alara's tiny handprint locked in his desk. Life was not perfect, not in the clean way stories pretend. Elias Varn remained somewhere beyond the edge of their peace. The world remained complicated, and danger did not disappear simply because love had arrived, but it no longer ruled them. Leor painted, exhibited, won, created, and came home to a man who no longer pretended distance was safety. Everett fought his wars outside and left his weapons at the door, because inside, there was warmth, the scent of white tea and honey, the soft weight of a child asleep between them, and the quiet certainty that this was not weakness. It was the one thing worth protecting. One evening, months after the exhibition, Leor stood in the nursery doorway and watched Everett sitting in the dim light, Alara asleep against his chest, one tiny hand fisted in his shirt, his large hand covering her back with impossible care. "You're spoiling her," Leor whispered. Everett didn't look guilty, not even slightly. "She's my daughter," he said, as if that explained everything. Leor smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "And me?" Everett looked up then, his gaze finding Leor with the same certainty it had held since the day he chose him. "You," he said quietly, "are the reason I have anything to spoil." The words settled softly, warmly, and Leor crossed the room without thinking, sitting beside him, resting his head against Everett's shoulder while Alara slept between them. For a moment, there was no other world, no alley, no blood, no fear, no question of belonging. Only this room, this family, this impossible life that had somehow become real. Leor closed his eyes, breathing in the scent that had once saved him: dark wood, leather, warmth, home. And for the first time since he had fallen into this world, he didn't wonder if he belonged here anymore, because Everett's hand found his. Alara stirred softly between them, and everything he had once been afraid to want was already holding him back.